master at work. All these computers. He's the master of the computer.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Okay, so our opening activity is just a little review to create a storyboard that outlines the life of Moses up until his return to Egypt. So,
what do you mean by a storyboard?
Like a timeline, of what happened to Moses. So
Okay.
let's see.
Let's start with that.
I'm writing it down.
So we'll start. I'll start. He was born to Jewish.
No, Hebrew.
Hebrew, yes, Hebrew mother and father, I'm assuming. So then anybody else can just jump in. What happened after that?
When his mother put him in a basket because they were going to kill all the males, right?
Right.
So they put him in a basket. And
But before they did that, they put pitch on the outside of the basket so it would be waterproof.
yeah,
Okay, that's true.
that's true. So he didn't drown.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So then what after the basket? So then in the basket with the pitch.
So Pharaoh's daughter found him.
Right,
Very
Pharaoh's daughter.
privileged life.
Yep.
Yes, but in between there, his mother put him in the basket that was made with the pitch, and put him in the reeds.
And Mary Ellen said that the daughter found him. Pharaoh's daughter found him, and then
Princess.
the princess.
Princess found him,
And then he grew up.
and he lived in the palace and had a very
Very privileged.
Now, his mother made sure that he was going to be found by the princess because,
Right.
you know, it was
She's
so
smart.
Mary, the princess
Well,
wanted
his sister suggested that they
Yep.
use the mother as a nurse.
That's right. So his mother was his nurse, right? Then he grew up very privileged. Grew up to that.
and
Then what happens?
Isn't the next, does anything happen in between that and when he comes out of Pharaoh's whatever
well. Then he
court
killed. Then
and
he kills.
murders the guy.
He murders the guy.
Those his fellow people.
Who did he kill? Why? I forget.
He
I know I
killed-
read it.
Because he was feeding a Hebrew.
That's right. He was using it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An Egyptian taskmaster.
Right. That's right.
So that was
Right.
his
When
way.
he kills somebody.
Yeah.
Kills him.
Mm-hmm.
So then he's a criminal, so he goes into exile.
And he buried him there in the sand.
Yeah, but somebody saw him.
But somebody saw
Oh,
him.
really?
Another Hebrew slave.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
He had to go into exile.
he threatened, he was trying to do something, and Moses was not very happy with the slave. And so the slave threatened that he would expose Moses. And so Moses took off towards Midian.
Right.
And marries Jethro's daughter. I don't remember her
Yeah.
name.
Zipporah.
Right.
Zipporah.
He meets them at the well, and they couldn't get the water, and he rescues them. He rescues her. He marries her
Yes.
for 40 years.
They have some sons.
Right? Two sons.
Yeah.
And then.
And he was a sheep herder.
Right. Right.
yeah, that was his job. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And so one night, as he's bringing the sheep back, he sees this bush that looks like it's on fire.
Right.
And he's 80 at that time. I
Yep.
think.
Yeah. Like 82 years old or something like that.
Come on, Barbara.
All right, so he sees a burning bush, and he hears a voice speaking to him from the bush, and he has a dialogue with that voice, and a voice says, "I've got a job for you."
Right.
And when a bush talks to you, you listen. So the assignment was, and he had no right to not accept it, you go back and talk to the Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh, very simple message, let my people go.
Right.
Moses was able to memorize it. 4 words.
Right. And so then
And the voice identified himself as I am.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Right. He said, who shall I say sent me? Mhm.
Right.
Okay. And then he's on his way to Egypt, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So we can move on.
Okay.
Okay, this is our opening prayer. Eternal God, we remember your enduring promise to be with us always. Be with us now as we continue with the story of Moses. Open our eyes to our own part in the continuing story of your loving way with humankind. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, we pray.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, now
Okay.
now the fun part comes along.
Mhm.
Now I'm going to try to show the video. Let me see. Maybe I should stop the sharing. And go back to the sharing screen. Do you see anything on the screen yet?
Not yet.
Oh, it's every time.
Yeah.
All right. Didn't see that either, right?
No.
Okay. That's for me. Thank you for calling.
Mhm.
Now can you see something?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Here we go.
In our last session, we left Moses in the Sinai, having heard from God at the burning bush, and God calling him to get going, I'm sending you. So now he's made his way back to the land of Goshen, made his way back to what I believe was the capital city of Per-Ramses, where the Israelite slaves have been building the city, making their mud bricks, and he's gone to confront Pharaoh. I want to say just a word about who this Pharaoh was. So scholars debate which Pharaoh, actually scholars debate when it was that Moses lived. Did he live in the 1400s? Did he live in the 1300s? Did he live in the 1200s? Most mainline scholars that I've read date him in the 1200s. And so the story just makes some sense when it's dated in the 1200s. It's not materially important to the story and to what we take away from it, but it does make for a great telling. And it seems as though the biblical author might have intended for us to read this story as taking place during the reign of Ramses II. Now, as we think about Ramses II, his fingerprints are all over Egypt. He was building and reigning in a golden era for Egypt, and he was building more building projects than any other pharaoh. In fact, when you go across Egypt, you'll find more evidence of Ramses II than any other pharaoh. You'll see his buildings, you'll see his statue, you'll see his cartouche, all over the place. Just south of Cairo proper is the archaeological park dedicated to the city of Memphis. Memphis was one of the ancient capitals of Egypt. And there you'll find a massive statue that was commissioned by Ramses II. And that massive statue probably stood 40 to 45 feet tall. Now it lies on its back. It's about 33 feet remain of the statue. And what it reminds me of, you find statues like this all over Egypt. It reminds me of something about this man, Pharaoh Ramses II. And I think of some of the dictators of the last 100 years, whether it's Saddam Hussein or Stalin or others, who insist on having large pictures of themselves all over the place, statues of themselves everywhere. It tells you something about the person. And this is what I think of when I see the Colossus of Ramses II at Memphis. By the way, when you're in the Valley of the Kings near Thebes, you have a chance to actually visit Ramses II's grave. But you can do one better than that. If you go to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, you can actually see the man himself. There he lies in state. You see even his hair. It's a reddened color because of the chemicals that were used in the embalming. his fingernails carefully manicured. This is not some fictional figure. Now, Moses comes and confronts Ramses II in the capital city of Per-Ramses. And I want to take you there to see some of the ruins that may very well have been built by the Israelites themselves. The capital city that was built by Ramessu, or Ramses II, it was actually started by his grandfather, Ramses I. Seti I continued to build on the city, and Ramessu, or Ramses II, completed the city, became this major capital in the north in Egypt. So here we enter the temple that was dedicated by Ramses II to the god Ammon. You'll see Ramses' statue is here, another statue here, and this is the entrance to this temple. Now, as we walk through it, this temple is huge, it's massive. And as you come through, as far as you could see all the way through here were the temple courts. It culminated in, at the very end, what would have been the Holy of Holies. As we think of the temple in Jerusalem, we think of this idea of the Holy of Holies. And as we come through, I want to show you just a few of the things that you'll see in this temple. Let's take a look. So this is something very interesting. This may have been a part of the temple to the god Ammon. And what you find here is Ramses II, Ramessu II, and he's standing preparing to punish a Hittite. So this is a foreigner, a man from another country, preparing to punish him as an offering to the god. And this is the god Ammon here. This is the main god of the Egyptian pantheon. And so this gives you a sense, this is an offering that he's making to the god Ammon as he's punishing the Hittite. This may have been a part of the temple that Ramses II had created, and again, capturing this idea of punishing the foreigner who's here as an offering to the god Ammon. Let's continue to explore. So this is something fascinating that you find in the remains of the temple. You find once more Ramses II, and here he's offering to the god Ammon the goddess Justice. So he is the purveyor of justice. He's offering as a sacrifice justice. We find his cartouche, this is his given name, and this is his coronation name. And so as Moses and Aaron are coming, they're demanding justice for the Israelites. This is what Ramses II is offering to the god Ammon. And so they're approaching him demanding the very thing that he's purporting to offer in this temple. So Moses and Aaron approach Pharaoh and ask him to release the Israelites, to allow them to go into the wilderness to worship for 3 days. That's all they asked to begin with. Just 3 days to go into the wilderness to worship. And of course he says, no, that's not going to happen. And he says, if they have so much time that they can go and worship in the wilderness, they can be making more bricks, or they can be doing more work. And so as a sort of punishment for even asking, he now said, we're no longer going to supply the straw with the mud for you to make the bricks. You've got to go get the straw yourselves and start making the bricks. This created great pain for the Israelites, the idea that they had to continue to make the same number of bricks, but were no longer able to have the straw provided. So here you can find an example of a mud brick. This entire wall is mud brick construction, mud mixed with straw, formed into bricks, dried by the sun, and then formed into these walls that are still standing here 3,000 years after they were constructed. And as you see these, you can see the mud and the straw mixed together. These bricks are over 3,000 years old. They were used to build walls, they were used to build houses, they were used to build the later pyramids prior to the time of Moses. And they were used to build the capital city of Per-Ramses. Millions upon millions of these bricks all over the land. And you can't help but hold them in your hands and think, I wonder if the Israelite slaves built these particular bricks, these mud bricks. And so once more, Moses and Aaron approach God, ask God, what should we do? And then that ultimately results in God saying, I want you to go back and tell Pharaoh that unless he's willing to let the Israelites go free, plagues are coming. Something horrible is coming. And ultimately, of course, this was a battle between the God of Moses and the gods of Egypt. As we think of those 10 plagues, at least some scholars believe that the plagues were a sort of satirical way of pronouncing judgment upon Egypt's gods and demonstrating that the God of Israel, the God of Moses, was far more powerful than the gods of Egypt. So I'll just remind you of the plagues. The first of the plagues was the water turning to blood. And there was a god of the Nile River, Hapi was his name. And this demonstrated Yahweh's power over Hapi. And so Moses confronted Pharaoh by the Nile. And as he confronted him and told him God's desire to let the people go, Pharaoh's heart continued to be hardened. And so it was that Moses took his staff and he struck the waters of the Nile River. And the waters turned blood red. and the people could no longer drink from them anymore, and the fish began to die in the river. And yet still, after all of this, Pharaoh's heart remained hard, and he would not let God's people go. And then the frogs jump out of the river and onto land, and the people come to despise the frogs. And one of the Egyptian gods was Hecate, who was portrayed as a frog. And then, of course, we have the gnats and the flies, and the gnats, they might have been lice or mosquitoes. And these begin to spread disease. And you've got the disease on the livestock, and the cows begin to die. And when we think of the cows beginning to die, we think of Hathor, who was portrayed as a cow. And Hathor is one of the gods most loved by the Egyptian people. But in this case, the cattle are dying. What does that say about God's power over Hathor? Then we have the plague of the boils on the skin, the plague of the hail and fire. We have the plague of the locusts. And then the ninth plague is the plague of darkness. And here I'm reminded that Ramses' name, Ramasu, was really Ra Moses. Ra Moses was son of the sun god Ra, and Moses was just son of nobody. For 3 days, there's complete darkness. Whether it's a dust storm or something else, the sun can't be seen. And once more we see the power of Yahweh, Israel's God, more powerful than even the sun god himself. God has defeated all of the Egyptian gods in these plagues. The last of the plagues is the plague of the firstborn. And every Egyptian household is affected by this plague. The firstborn of every household, the firstborn of every flock are taken by the angel of death that night. But the Israelites are saved. The angel of death passes over them. They quickly hurry and pack their things. There's no time for their bread to rise, and so they eat unleavened bread. And Pharaoh demands that they leave the land of Egypt. And they make their way towards what we often think of as the Red Sea. But in fact, in Hebrew, it says is the Reed Sea. Most likely, this was a journey they made south and then finally a bit north, and confronted by a series of lakes that run alongside what's now the Suez Canal. Many of them folded into the Suez Canal when it was built. But they're surrounded on one side by a lake, or the Sea of Reeds. On the other side, Pharaoh sends his armies, his chariots, to go and to take them back as slaves. The Israelites, seeing the dust from Pharaoh's armies coming, they cry out to Moses, "What have you done bringing us out here to die? At least we would have been able to stay alive if we'd stayed back in slavery in Egypt. Why have you brought us here?" And in their fear, Moses comforts them and encourages them and says, "Be strong and don't be afraid, for the Lord our God will deliver us." God tells Moses, "Raise up your hand above the water." And he raises his hand above the water. And the winds begin to blow, and the waters begin to part. And the people are instructed to pass through between the waters as though on dry land. And God did his greatest act of delivering his people, one final dramatic act to set them free. It may very well have been in this place. And once on the other side, Pharaoh's armies begin to chase them through the water. And Moses is instructed to bring his arm down, and the waters envelop Pharaoh's armies, and his armies are destroyed. And the Israelites begin to break out in song, "Our God has delivered us." And God has defeated not only Pharaoh, not only Egypt's gods, but God has defeated the most powerful army on the face of the planet as well. And God has delivered his people, Israel. And part of what this reminds us of is that in the end, good is always going to triumph over evil. In the end, God is always going to be the victor. And that act of deliverance for the Israelites was an act of pure grace. They didn't earn it. They didn't do anything for it. God delivered them in that moment, and they were set free. And what God did for the Israelites in delivering them from evil, in delivering them and setting them free, God longs to do for us as well. Evil will never have the final word. Hate, sin, suffering, it's never going to have the final word. In the end, God triumphs. Goodness, love, grace, mercy, hope triumphs over darkness, hate, evil, and sin. What was true for the Israelites is true for you.
There's a lot of contradictions there.
Yes.
Between natural occurrences maybe and what God did.
Yes. Yes, that was
but,
very
yeah, right.
interesting. Yes, we will discuss that. We will.
Make some adjustments here.
First of all, he didn't separate. It wasn't the Red Sea, because that's further down. It's the Sea of Reed or something.
Right.
Which is a little shallow.
Right. Yeah.
And it's so interesting.
Yeah. Did everybody know what Patsy's talking about in the book? It was, you know, talked about the scientific, that it could have been like a red tide.
The algae or something.
The algae, then that killed made the frogs, and then the insects came from the frogs, and the fleas, and then they bit the people and made them sick, and you know, yeah.
Well, let's not get too ahead of ourselves.
Okay, I know. But it's interesting. Okay, so video discussion. Have you ever taken on a task that seemed especially difficult or even impossible? What was your experience, and how do you think it compared with Moses' experience? Anybody have any examples of that?
I guess when I was 24, I joined the fire department. I was living in Lindenhurst at the time. That was a tall order, but I was already a nurse, and I figured I'd run rescue. Wow. And I loved it and did it for 4 years. But you know, to think about it now, back then, like I had some guts, I guess. I don't know. It worked out in the end.
Wow.
But that was, to me, that was, now looking back, it was a daunting task. But
yeah.
But there were no, you know, locusts or frogs or anything that attacked me. So I guess I was all right.
Yeah. Anybody else have something that seemed especially difficult or impossible?
Working in the psych hospital.
Yeah.
I remember when I didn't expect them to call me and say, it was like 3 months after I put my resume in, the state called and said, oh, you can come in for an interview. Yeah, I was just doing it. You know, that'd be interesting to apply to a psychiatric hospital. I didn't really expect them to hire me.
So did it seem like an impossible task after they hired you?
Yeah, that's what I mean. During the training, yeah, like when they bring you through the unit for the first time and you see the patients, and it's scary.
Yeah.
It was a state hospital.
Yeah.
Everyone was there, court ordered.
Oh.
Yeah, they weren't there because they wanted to get better.
Yeah. And my first psych experience in college was at Creedmoor.
Oh.
Which was, yeah.
That's a good one?
Oh, it was scary as anything. It was terrifying. It was terrifying. Yeah. But nothing like Moses' experience. So the 10 plagues. So then we can talk about what he talked about in the book. Do you think they were natural occurrences or supernatural events? Why?
I don't know. I don't know. You know, it could be. You know, you have the choice to believe.
Well, if God created the earth and everything on it, then it's not. It was not supernatural. It was what God had created. If you want to look at it that way.
So even if, are you saying even if God made the red tide happen?
I mean, you're not seeing that now because you don't see. Maybe we should be watching it when God gives us the red tide, because we're not paying attention to what He's trying to tell us. But I think, you know, he used nature against Egypt, and He's in control of everything. That's how I see it. And you know, you're one thing after another, but He really had the control then.
Supernatural is self-appointed. It is more than natural. And so the hand of God had to be there because man can't make anything that's beyond natural.
Yeah.
Right, but before I read the book, before I read this chapter, I always thought that God did all these things, okay? And now when I read it, I'm reading it with a new lens, I think. And there's a progression of what happened. Yeah. You know, because the water turns to blood and then the frogs come. So the frogs die because the water's bloody, okay? And then the frogs die, and then the lice come because bugs come. Right? So it's just a progression of things. And I never really put that together. You know, when I would read this story, I always thought, yeah, God did all of those things. And yes, he did do all of those things, but just the way they happened now, and it was explained differently in the book. To me, my eyes were, you know what I mean? I just had a different understanding of it.
I think science has made us aware of that progression. And in those days, there was not the science of the discoveries that flies and the gnats and the frogs and the fish dying and the disease. They didn't know about all those microscopic things that cause bad things to happen. We know that now. So I guess our brain is in a different focus, that we're looking to science rather than to God.
Well, people believe way more in magic than we do today. Today we believe everything is scientific, but those people had feel for magic, and they didn't know that God, or didn't even think that God was doing it. They thought it was something else because they had many other avenues to look at. You know, they had their own statuary that they believed in. Some of them believed in the sun as God. So there was a lot of complications in the societies in general. That magic existed. Today, we hardly believe in magic at all, except on the stage.
It's interesting that some of the plagues were actually the gods of Egypt, which I never realized before. Like the god of the frogs, and then the god of there was another one. And he used that god to destroy and to bring them down.
Right.
Which I never kind of saw that part of it. So he used Egypt's gods against them because he was more powerful.
The other thing that contributes to this is the idea that Moses really had nothing to do with the plagues.
No.
It isn't like he was not doing something, you know. You look at the miracles of Jesus, for example, and, you know, there are things that Jesus literally did, you know, but here Moses is not involved in doing anything, but God is sending these plagues one by one. And there is a reasonable progression of them so that, you know, A comes before B and B before C and so on. So that's what makes it particularly interesting. And even though it's a natural, it can be explained naturally, the fact that the meaning of it, the meaning of it is supernatural. It is something more than just these natural events, especially seeing the outcome of the whole thing.
Right.
You know, what happened as a result of all these things, you know, because it's, you know, they didn't just have these plagues and then, you know, they pick up the newspaper and say, oh, what's new today? You know? I mean, everything happened as a result of it.
Yeah, I think it makes the story actually more believable because, you know, and then, you know, just the idea of looking through all of those things. I think the same thing that we need to look at today, that God is still working, but we don't always recognize it.
I have a whole book at home that goes through the entire set of plagues and so on. And it looks at them from that point of view, the natural phenomena. Even the death of the firstborn. It was very interesting how the author interpreted that, because he said that in the houses of Egypt, the firstborn always slept on the lowest level, you know, and sleeping on the lowest level meant that person would be vulnerable to marsh gases, which would infiltrate into the home up to a certain level. So anybody sleeping above that level would never have been affected by it. But the cattle, you know, and the firstborn sons would be vulnerable. So interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so book and Bible study. Describe what archaeologists tell us about Ramses II. Imagine the face-off of Moses and Aaron to be something like a boxing match. Describe the first interchange between Pharaoh and Moses and Aaron. What were the brothers asking for? What was Pharaoh's response? So to go back, so what did you think? He had a lot about Ramses II in there. Mm-hmm. Wow. Any reflection on how he seemed to be?
Well, he felt he was a demigod. You know, yeah. He ruled over, and he was very, I guess, very. The statues all over is just making people realize, reminding people that I'm the God. You have to listen to me. You have to do what I say. And he was very made himself very self-important, and that controlled the people. Right.
But he had or else. If you don't do this, this is what's going to happen to you.
Right.
Exactly. He was, and he ruled by fear.
Yeah. I was amazed at all the statues of him. I mean, what an ego. Yeah. Crazy.
But he considered himself God.
Yeah.
Well, the people did too.
He didn't think he was almost God or a demigod. He believed he was God.
Right.
But what's interesting is that the building he did throughout his whole reign, it was not just his statues, but actually buildings that are still around today.
Right.
He lived to be quite old too.
Yeah.
So those things had a tendency to continue.
Right. So when Moses and Aaron, what was the first thing they asked for? And what was his response? And how did then he up the ante?
I was in the video.
Yeah.
About the wilderness worship.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But did Moses know that was what was going to be said, so to say, between Aaron and Moses? Is that actual in the scripture that first we're going to go to the Pharaoh and say we've got to go out into the desert to worship our God? Or was that?
That's what they requested.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I don't remember that part. I'm reading that so many times. It just
no.
Yeah. Pharaoh said no.
And then he made them go pick up the straw to make it harder to bricks.
I can't believe those bricks are still there and you can see the straw. Yeah. That is like crazy.
Amazing.
Do you think anything we build today is going to be here in 3,000 years?
So
makes you think about that building in Florida.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
How terrible that was.
Right. So how did God respond to that?
That's where the plagues come in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then I think we've already talked a lot about the plagues. He talked about the maximalist, the minimalist, and the moderate position of looking at what happened. So how does it make a difference if we look at the story as a contest between Moses and Pharaoh, or a cosmic battle between God and the gods of Egypt?
Interesting. Well, because Pharaoh thought he was a god, yeah, I guess you could say it was a cosmic battle between Pharaoh and God, because he didn't think he was going to lose.
Right. But you could look at it between Moses and Pharaoh, but then take it to a higher level, right? Between God and the Egyptian gods.
Yeah.
And every time there was a plague, there was a pause until the plague was like kind of over. And he again, like Moses said, again, let my people go. And the Pharaoh didn't believe in the power that Moses had from God. So he just kept getting more and more plagues.
Right. Well, I think the idea of the cosmic battle between God and the gods of Egypt is looking back at the whole thing, you know, Moses and Pharaoh face to face, that was not what was going on. They were essentially two men that were, you know, had different points of view at least. But this cosmic battle is something that later on, as the story gets told, you begin to realize it's a much bigger story than simply two men, you know, boxing.
Is there any history of how, of the first time Moses faced the Pharaoh, that he realized it was Moses and that he was his daughter's son that killed a man?
Well, it's in the story itself, in the Bible.
Okay.
They didn't make it up.
No, I'm just saying, what was, I wonder what the Pharaoh said, what thought when he saw Moses standing in front of him 80 years, you know, 40 years later, and said, isn't this guy, who is this person who thinks he can tell me what to do?
Well, you have to read your Bible.
Okay.
Figure that one out.
All right. So,
are we really going to look at all these?
No, we didn't put them in.
Of course we didn't put them.
No. So this is
Read from chapter 7 to 11.
Yeah.
All right. These are the texts for each of the plagues.
Oh,
right.
So it's if you go through the books, the book of Exodus, chapter 7, 1 to 25, and then go into 8, and you can see how the verses just continue on, and then into chapter 9, and each one of the plagues is described there in those verses. So,
well, we can see if we can name all 10 plagues without looking.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I'll do the first one.
I'll do the second one.
The Red Sea, the water turning red.
Frogs leave.
It's 2.
And
The lice.
Yeah,
Lice.
right.
3.
Lice.
the
I'm gonna
bugs.
cheat.
Locust?
No. You got the page marked and everything.
The
now.
locusts or the
The locusts are in there. That's
Right.
4.
There's hail in there somewhere.
Hail, the boils on the people.
Yeah, the boils. That's 6.
The animals dying.
Yeah, the cattle.
Yeah, disease.
No, she's not cheating. How many we got?
Getting boils.
We said the
right?
boils.
Oil.
Oh, we did, I didn't see it.
Darkness, that's
right.
9.
Darkness.
8, I mean.
The locust.
And lost the first child, right?
It's what
Yeah.
the locust,
Yeah. And we've had in the 20s, didn't we have?
Oh, and then the first one, that's 10.
Yeah, nobody
That was-
said the first one. Yeah.
Oh,
That was
yeah.
10.
Right.
We had the locusts and destroyed, you know.
Yeah.
And we left out the lobster.
Lobster, right?
Well, you heard about boils, right? You boil a lobster.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God.
No.
Oh my goodness.
Right, moving right on.
How long was it dark for? They say darkness. How long
3
was it?
days, they said.
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of dust.
Oh, this is a good question.
Yeah. So what is the distinction between Pharaoh's hardening his heart and Pharaoh's heart being hardened by God?
Mm.
So this is something we were talking about yesterday with like so later on in Romans, Paul talks about this and he says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So in other words, it wasn't Pharaoh. He's saying that in that context, Pharaoh didn't have a will. It was God who hardened his heart. And the question's asking, what's the difference?
Wow.
In the beginning, it was Pharaoh was asserting himself as, you know, as the king. I'm the boss here, and so each time he saw the challenge, he got more and more stubborn, and then finally, you know, God said, "Okay, you want to be stubborn? Go ahead." You know.
So that's Pharaoh hardening his own heart?
In the beginning, yeah,
We did, yeah.
that's what it said.
Huh.
Yeah, that's what the scripture said.
Yeah.
That Pharaoh hardened his heart, and then God hardened his heart afterwards.
Yeah.
It was
It's
a
not
progression.
clear. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like, you know, he walks out into the mud and it gets deeper and deeper. And then finally it gets hard.
Yeah, well,
You can't get out.
it says the interpretation is challenging to those, including, you know, the author who believes that God gives us free will.
Yeah.
Well, he's a Methodist.
Right. Yeah, right. They're on the liberal side, right?
You got to ask Pastor that one.
But wasn't Pharaoh kind of playing the "I'm stronger than you are" game?
Yeah.
He was just playing.
That's
with
exactly the way I was thinking too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then finally, you know, he got so hard that it just, God just let it harden. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't going to be lived in. There was no alternative. It was beyond the point of return.
Well, I think finally God brought down Hitler, right?
Eventually,
I mean, you know, and ended World War II.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too, though, you know, I think it's always been a little troubling, the idea of the killing of the firstborn of God, you know, letting that happen, you know, that's troubling.
Well, that was a Pharaoh doing that.
It was the Pharaoh, it wasn't God.
Hmm?
God didn't send
Oh,
that.
you mean the first one?
Like,
Oh, you're talking about the plague.
The
The 10th plague, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's where the natural and supernatural comes together. Because there are natural forces that are at work and not just supernatural.
Does anyone remember the Great Recession of 2008?
Yeah, yeah, temporary plagues.
Moving us along, yeah.
What God was revealed to hold allegiance in that crisis? Huh. Well,
We got a Wall Street.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah, we looked that up to try to figure out what actually happened in the Great Recession of 2008. And it's we've heard the term before, but I'm not sure that we really, you know, think very much about it. But essentially what was going on is that banks were being encouraged to give out loans to people for real estate, to purchase houses and property and so on and so forth, even though they would not qualify for those loans in the first place. So they were making the loans easier and easier for people to get. And so they could get larger and larger loans. And when the time came to repay it, of course, they wouldn't be able to pay it back. I remember this conversation personally. I, you know, had every once in a while I'll click on something because I want to find out about it. So I get this phone call from a guy and he's telling me, oh yeah, we can lend you, you know, $150,000 and pay off your mortgage and so on. And you know, you can take your time paying it off. You only have to pay the interest, you know, and just pay the interest every month. And that's like, you know, a few $100s. But, you know, if, and I said, well, when do you ever pay off the loan? Because if you owe this money, how do you pay? He said, oh, I don't have to worry about that, you know. You just pay and keep paying the interest, that's all. It's, think of it like paying rent, you know. And so you never really pay off the loan. And of course, once inflation started up and so on and so forth, then people began to realize they couldn't even pay off the interest, much less the loans. And everything just collapsed. Everything collapsed.
Who was it, what political party was in that?
During 2008, it was Republican.
Oh.
Yeah. That was after 9/11. Yeah.
So what other gods seem to hold sway in our culture today?
Money, I was just going to say, you said
yeah.
Money, power,
greed.
Yeah, power is big right now. Telling people what they can do, what they can't do. what they can believe, what they can't believe.
Yeah. The whole, you talking about the whole political correctness.
Yeah.
You know,
Of everything.
Of everything.
Yeah, even, you know, we were talking about this recently. You know, the pronouns that you use to describe who you are.
Yeah.
Like you can decide whether you're male or female. I mean, you know, it's just, that's part of our culture.
Yeah.
That's the culture.
And if you can decide it today, you can decide it tomorrow as well.
Or change your mind.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, sure, you can change your mind every day. Or you can be both. I mean, why can't you just be both?
The doctor assigns you a gender when you're born. That was the word I couldn't. He assigns you, and then every day you can identify as whatever you want.
So you have an assigned gender.
Yeah.
Now, it's like when you're getting the shots, they ask you, what gender are you? And they give you like about a half dozen different choices.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was really
on Facebook. There's like 40 different genders you can pick at least. Yeah, it's really weird.
So, you know, even the education system right now is trying to control people.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, in the education system, they're trying to, you know, tell children what they need to believe about themselves, about their identity as human beings, and so on and so forth. And that's getting into the realm of religion at that point, because it's no longer science or history or even mathematics or something like that. It's getting into the field of what we believe, and that's religion. So that's where these things are kind of crossing over. And we're going to be facing that more and more in the years ahead as Christians.
Belief rather than fact. Belief versus fact.
Yeah, everybody has their own belief system, and what you believe is what you believe, but you have your truth. You know, that's an expression that they use.
Is that a tangent on free will?
What?
Is that a tangent on free will? Believe what you want to believe in free will?
Well, that would be a Christian doctrine.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is outside of Christianity.
So are there other contemporary counterparts to plagues, or are there priorities that have the potential of leading to a plague?
Or in one.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
or hopefully leading.
Yeah.
McDonald's.
What?
What?
Yeah.
McDonald's.
Oh my gosh. Counterpart plague.
Well, it's going to be interesting in the next couple of years to see how things actually come about, see what happens, to see if inflation continues to grow, to see if immigration continues to grow, you know, all those kinds of things that, you know, will affect our society.
Yeah, because money is the big god. We're
power.
taught from a young age. Money is how we get our security. Yeah, if you have a lot of money, then you're secure. Yeah, and there's something more to happen to that. If you don't have a good credit score, people will tell you, "Oh, your life is over. You don't have your credit score is bad." You know, that's not true. But yeah,
yeah.
So if something happened to the money system.
Well, the plagues, the counterparts to plagues, you know, when it's referring to plagues now, they're talking about the outcomes or the consequences, right? So, you know, are there other consequences that we're experiencing now, or that we're going to be experiencing in the future? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, now they're working on going to space, right?
Yeah.
The multi-billionaire, you know, guys.
Yeah, taking a joyride.
So whatever they're going to do there, I don't know.
A rocket ship.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think about kids and teenagers and the consequences of, you know, how they're growing up and you know,
well, just
what they're being taught.
And just look at the opiate epidemic right now and so on, you know, how that was spreading and so on. And, you know, they did some research into that, and they found that the pharmaceutical companies were advised to focus on those doctors that were prescribing a lot of opiates and to ignore the ones that were not doing it, because those are the ones that were not doing it. So, you know, encourage the ones who are prescribing those things to prescribe even more, and so on and so forth. And, you know, I was listening, and it said West Virginia, for example, and parts of Ohio are some of the worst areas of the country, because that's what they were doing. They, you know, they were doing that very thing.
Sure.
They told them to hire more salespeople to sell more opiates, more doctors. Yeah. Yeah, and that's really what they were doing.
Well, that gets back to all the kickbacks that the doctors used to get for prescribing certain things, and they get trips and all kinds of things if they, the perks, yep.
Yeah. So you're back to the God of money again.
Back to the money, right.
Yeah. Really scary.
Yeah.
And the consequences are tremendous. I mean, what a plague.
Oh yeah.
What a plague.
Yeah.
You know, how many people have lost their spouses, their children, others to that kind of
Their
stuff.
houses, their livelihood, their,
their
dreams, they're just endless.
So book and Bible study discussion. Location of the Red Sea.
Reed Sea.
I'm sorry. Yes, what difference, if any, does it make that the Israelites may have made a crossing that was less dramatic than that traditionally portrayed in film?
Well, it said in the book that part of where they crossed could be as shallow as 3 feet.
Right, right.
So if the wind blew the water away, they'd be able to walk on dry mud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But who knows? You don't know.
It's interesting. There are videos on YouTube that I saw which show a totally different path. You know, that the Reed Sea and that whole business, that's up in Egypt, if you recall on the map. But what the video was suggesting is that the people got into the Sinai Peninsula and went across the Sinai Peninsula and got to the other side where the Red Sea is, okay? And that there's kind of a underwater land bridge there. And they were suggesting that that's really where the crossing of the Red Sea took place, which is a totally different theory from what they heard in the video.
And then in the book, they talked about the way the chariots were built, right? That they were so heavy that they got stuck in the mud.
Right.
Yeah. And when the water came back, they found. And there's also archaeological things on YouTube where they've discovered
chariot wheels.
Yeah, chariot wheels.
Really?
Yeah, in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
So it is a real controversy amongst archaeologists.
Yeah.
Wow, we never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but isn't that easier to believe than this whole sea splitting? I mean,
sure.
You know.
Yeah, the movie, you know, makes it very dramatic and so on.
Right.
Right. So the question about the film, it doesn't really matter what the film has. What's in the book? That's
in
the book.
Yeah.
The book came before the film, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, the interesting outcome of that whole way of thinking is that it relocates where Mount Sinai was. And instead of seeing Mount Sinai in the, you know, that area there, as it's portrayed like in the video here, it's actually in Arabia, Saudi Arabia, on the other side of the Red Sea. So, interesting. So, in other words,
I have to go back to work. I'm sorry.
Bye, Marielle.
Okay.
All right. Have a good week.
Bye. See you soon.
See you Sunday.
Yeah. So anyway, it's interesting, and you know, I'll sit down there at 4:30 in the afternoon, and I'll turn these things on YouTube and just watch them, and it's fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah.
But there's a real controversy over it.
Right. So how does our understanding of the crossing, if we focus less on details and more on the crossing as a contest of God against the great military forces of the time.
Guess who wins?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Is he going to talk about the Passover?
No, that's not a part of this particular.
It's in the chapter. Right? Yeah.
It's in the chapter, but it's not.
That's in the chapter.
Well, this is the part where he talked about
Right.
Passover.
Okay. Defining the story for Jews and defining the story for Christians. Okay, so what was the defining story for Jews? For Christians, how are they similar and how do they differ? Well, excuse me.
Well, that's when that's when God made them his covenant people and lead them to the promised land. The story of the Passover, the final flavor.
Yeah, so the Exodus is what made the Passover possible.
Right.
Or Passover is what made the Exodus possible, I guess that'd be more accurate.
And for Christians, it says that God cares about the nobodies.
Oh.
God will ultimately defeat the arrogant, prideful, and cruel. Sees our suffering and will deliver us. I like that part.
So then Christians broaden it, really. That's what he's saying. Yeah.
So really, if that, you know, if you look at that aspect of it, that's Jews and Christians have that in common.
Yeah.
Pay attention to the nobodies of this world.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think it's part of the Jewish tradition to have compassion for people who are poor and, you know, on the outs, not just to be, we have as Christians, we have a biased view of Jews because we think of the Jews as being so exclusive because of all of their dietary laws and other kinds of customs and so forth. And their separateness, you know, from the Gentile society.
But if you read the story, it was written to the Jews. The Christians were just like so many Gentiles that were plugged in later.
Yeah. I mean, it was the Jewish people who, you know, got freed.
But they weren't even Jews.
Or they, right, the Hebrews, right.
Yeah.
So what do you think grace has to do with the Exodus story? And where do we see grace in our own story?
You can't live without it. Grace should be, that word should be changed to trust. And that's what's essential to the survival of society, is that we trust that there's nobody in this room who's going to pull out a 45 and blow us all away. And we hope that when we go out the door, that won't happen either.
Well, grace, of course, is the favor of God towards people. And I think that that's what we see in the Exodus story, that God is predisposed to have mercy on all people. And so he preserved this chosen people of Israel so that they ultimately might bring the Messiah and the word of God to the whole population of the world, Jew and Gentile alike. And that's by grace alone. It's people can't, you know, this was not, the people did not have an uprising and they decided we're going to demonstrate against the Pharaoh, you know, and then they got all their forces together to leave. No, it didn't work that way. It was all by grace.
Well, Moses tried to. That's what I was saying last week. When he killed the guy, that was his attempt at doing it without God.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
He murdered the one guy.
Yeah, it didn't solve anything.
No. Yeah.
You just chase them away for 40 more years.
I also think grace, you know, if you think of the grace as something that's undeserved, you know, I mean, the people, you know, God just did this for them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
They didn't do anything to make it happen. It was a gift, you know, it was God choosing them and doing it for them.
Well, there's a connection between in the Passover, because in the Passover, Egypt's firstborn children died because of the sins of Egypt. In the gospel, Jesus is God's firstborn who would die for the sins.
Yeah.
Of all people.
Yeah, so that's a connection. Yeah.
That's a connection.
Yeah.
Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world.
Yeah, you're right.
Quote John the Baptist.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So where do we see grace in our own story?
Where do we see grace in our own story?
Every day.
Everywhere.
You want to say more about that?
I have a lot of struggles and challenges and day-to-day physical pain, whatnot. And I wake up in the morning and I say, thank God for another day. And I know he's with me, getting me through. Although some days it's harder to see than others, but I have to stop and think, you know.
Sure.
I used the term vertical.
Yes, I remember that, yes.
I said that on Sunday with people
Yep.
coming in. Like, good morning, and I said, I'm glad I'm vertical.
Yes,
and not horizontal.
yes, that's right. That's right.
Everybody smiled.
Yep, it's true.
Yeah.
That's just because you don't want to be a liar. Grace in our own story. And I think the other part of that is that the more we experience grace in our lives, the more able we are to show grace toward others. You know, and so, you know, grace begets grace. And that's important too. It doesn't end with us, it keeps going. And, you know, touches lives of other people and they touch lives of other people. So that's the way God works in the world.
I don't know. It seems to me that maybe we're getting a little more gracious, but more people will hold the door open.
Oh yeah, I've noticed that.
Than years ago. Years ago, they let the door slam in your face. Today, the guy with the tattoos is standing there holding the door open for you. And you think to yourself, what am I missing here?
That's interesting.
Reflect on responding to God's call. We did talk about defining story for Jews and defining story for Christians. So name others in the story of Moses who were unlikely choices for pivotal roles.
Princess.
Yeah.
Right in the top. First instead of last.
Yeah.
The midwives who said, oh, those Jewish women give their birth fast, so we weren't able to kill them.
Yeah,
that was such a cool
yeah.
excuse.
That was really good.
That was good.
And the mother. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting because, well, in the biblical story, we do have the names of the midwives, you know, but there's so many of those people in our lives that we don't know the names of, you know. So.
We don't know much about Moses' wife, do we?
Zipporah,
Yeah.
we know her name. We know also she did something as part of the story. What'd she do?
Killed somebody, right?
Moses'
Yeah, I
wife.
remember reading it, but I don't remember the details.
Yeah.
Did she?
I don't know.
You know, it was in here. It was in
She
here.
circumcised somebody and gave the foreskin
right.
to Moses.
He circumcised her sons,
Oh,
and that way
right,
preserved their life.
It was a blood gift.
right.
Because it was because you know they
Yeah,
were
I read it.
they were
Yeah,
genuine descendants of Abraham
It's something really
because
weird.
they were circumcised.
Might have been
I must
last
have been
chapter.
Yeah.
I think it was chapter 2.
So then that means that Moses was a lot younger than 7 days of age when he was put in that little basket. Because he would have been circumcised, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was his sons, though.
That was Zipporah.
Right. But Moses wouldn't have been circumcised either. Because even though he was a Hebrew, he would have been younger because why? How would they would not be safe? No, maybe he was older than that. Because the thing is, then they would know that he's Hebrew.
Yep, some open questions. Yeah.
Well, they wouldn't. I think Moses is the one that got that. No, Abraham.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be circumcised on the 8th day.
But Zipporah did it very quickly.
Right.
That's what they call it. Zipporah.
No, thank you.
That was bad.
Oh my goodness.
And moving right along, there's more here actually.
Okay, the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. So he met Moses at the mountain of God and kissed him. Then Moses told Aaron everything the Lord had sent him to say, and also about all the signs he had commanded him to perform. Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshiped. That is Exodus 4. So what was Aaron's role in this story, and what was Moses' role?
Well, don't forget, they had no books. They couldn't read, so everything was by word.
Right, right.
So Aaron was kind of a spokesman.
Right, right. Moses didn't like to talk, right?
Yeah.
Well, that was like the 5th time that Moses says, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't speak, please send somebody else. That's when God said, okay, what about your brother Aaron?
Right.
And then that follows the story where it went to all the people of the leaders, because he was one of the leaders of the Israelites in Egypt.
Right.
So Aaron maintained the connection back in Egypt, I guess.
Right.
So that was part of Aaron's role as well.
So how did they complement each other?
They helped each other.
Yeah.
They helped each other. They worked as a team.
There you go.
They worked as a team. Right.
And together they had a mission from God, like the Blues Brothers.
Well, I still, even though Aaron was supposed to be the better speaker, it's the way the scripture goes, it was actually Moses. So Aaron was the support person for Moses to tell Moses, you can do this. God knows you can do it. Do it.
Right.
Kind of read into it.
So who has God sent into our lives to serve as Aaron to help us?
I think the pastor is yeah.
And his wife.
Yeah, of course.
I would say you're good friends. You lean on your best friend.
Yeah. Yes. And how has God called us to serve as Aaron to others we are sent to help?
That's a question we don't have to answer right now, right? We can think about it right now.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because, Aaron is there at a critical time in doing an important task, but Moses is still the main man. So it was not about Aaron, Moses was the one that God sent to accomplish this.
Yeah. Okay, so wrapping up. In the story, I am troubled by find comfort in, and I still have questions about. Any responses to that?
Well, I think that it means that God sees us suffering and God will deliver us. And he is for the underdog. God.
Yeah.
So you find comfort in that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that troubles anyone or you have questions about? I still have a question about, you know, Aaron was 3 years older than Moses.
Wow.
But Moses is the one that got to ride in the basket. So my question is, you know, how did Aaron escape that problem? Is that something that came between the time when Aaron was born?
It was a different time.
Killing the babies at his age, if he was older.
He was older.
Yeah. No, I know. No, yeah.
So
he just snuck through there.
It would be different if he was younger than Moses, but if he was older,
Moses wouldn't have done it.
the Pharaoh didn't realize that the Hebrews were getting overpopulated and they could possibly overrun them.
So timing is everything.
Absolutely.
yeah.
But it's funny, you don't hear about Aaron until much later in the story.
No.
You don't hear about him in the beginning at all. It goes, you know, right to Moses.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. You can read that.
All right, wrapping up. Meaning of the Exodus story for Christians. God cares about the nobodies. God will ultimately defeat the arrogant, prideful, and cruel. God sees our suffering and God will deliver us. We don't have to remain enslaved to the things that bind us, and God can set us free. So which of these affirmations do you most respond to?
God sets us free.
God cares about the nobody.
God sets us free.
Yeah.
When we go to heaven.
Oh, we have different
Different
views on these. Yeah.
Okay.
I have to remember we don't have to remain enslaved to the things that bind us.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. They all apply, really.
God created us, He gave us free will.
Right.
Is that a door?
No.
That's a child.
This child. Oh my God.
So does anyone have actions that may be called to take in response to them?
Sounds like a dinosaur to me.
Yeah.
We have to call upon God, I think, you know. We have to.
But what is God calling us to do? That's the question.
Yeah.
We have to respond.
Yeah. Well, caring about the nobody.
Yeah, I was just going to say, caring about everybody, caring about those in your path, making a difference in people's lives. Like do one act of kindness a day. I always think of Ed's story in the store when he was $5 short of his order, and the register, the cashier.
Yeah.
He was going to put things back, and the cashier paid for, a young man paid for his thing.
I saw another one, and this was a military convocation school. There's a young man in a uniform, in an army uniform, and he's got a shopping cart full of groceries, and he pulls up to the cashier, and the guy just walks over out of nowhere, plunks down $80 and buys groceries. And I thought, wow. I mean, that wasn't even that kid's money that he saved, you know?
Yeah.
But it was the act that made it important.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think there's a connection between the Hebrews and the Christians, the Jews and the Christians, you know, that we believe in the same God, and we have to get along.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many divisions in both groups. In the Hebrew and in the Christian, there are so many divisions that it's very hard to put them together. God sees the suffering. And the difference between Lutherans and Methodists and Catholics and etc. It just goes on and on. And the same thing exists for the Jews. The Orthodox are this thing. It's just many pieces which ultimately at some point will have to begin to come together.
Right. Rather than look at the differences, to look at the similarities, to focus on that.
Got to go deeper.
Yeah.
Look for the things where we're together.
Right.
Well,
okay. We should be at the end, our closing prayer. God of the Exodus, we give thanks for your saving grace. Go with us now, as you have promised. Continue to abide with us, and by your Spirit, make your presence known. Keep us ever more aware of how we may be part of your redemption story. In the name of Jesus, amen.
All right, so we are coming.
Does anybody need a book?
Yeah, we're getting them. Did we get them all? We just got them, right?
Very, very interesting.
What are we doing after this?
Chapter 4. I don't know what we're doing. What are we doing after this?
Well, we did talk about time to heal.
We talked about that last week.
It is right. It's a book, but it's not an actual study, correct?
Well, we've got to make up the study.
Do you have a box full of those books? Or?
No, I don't have a box full of those books.
I think we have
3 weeks. We only have 3 weeks to.
Well, I can order some. Should I order?
What does that mean? It's not a study though. It's just a book. I mean.
Yeah, it's a book. It's called A Time to Heal.
Okay.
And basically, it talks about it is a biblical.
It's from 2021, right?
Yeah, it was written in April.
By the author?
Yeah, J.R. Briggs.
Thank you.
But I can get a bunch of those mailed to us.
If we want to do that.
If we want to, I can order. I can order, say, 15 copies.
That would work.
It's related to the pandemic, right?
Well, it's pandemic, but also to the whole ministry of healing in the church.
Okay.
And one of the things that Briggs was talking about is the fact that healing is an important element of what Christians are about. And it's part of what Jesus did, there was preaching, teaching, and healing. We have a tendency to focus on the preaching and teaching, but not so much on the healing. And when we do talk about healing, we have a tendency to focus on spiritual, emotional, and mental healing, but we don't often talk about physical healing. So this book pushes us to think about our ministry of prayer, how each Christian can participate in God's healing process in the lives of others. So, but that's something I need to work on some stuff, some questions and stuff. But I think it's possible, and we have, we can set up a format like this to raise those questions. Even have quotations from the book and stuff like that. We won't have a video.
We can do it together.
Yeah. Yeah, I was hoping the vicar would volunteer.
I was.
No, that's something that we've talked about.
Yeah. That's what I mean, but there's only 3 weeks left in this study, so if I could do it.
I think it's 8.
Oh, so that'll be an 8-week session.
Yeah, if you do one a week, right?
Yeah, I mean, we also.
We wouldn't, there's going to be a little bit of an interruption there.
I was going to say, we also could take a little bit of a break and,
well, if we do 2 chapters a week, 4 weeks at study instead of 8 weeks.
Or we could do something else on a short term and work on developing this.
Yeah.
And
it depends on the preparation you want.
Oh, sorry, that's more work for you.
To do that as like a fall thing.
Yeah, right. This would make more sense to do in the fall.
Okay. Yeah.
And then give us more time to put things together. But in the meantime, there was that one Adam Hamilton course called Why. Did anybody take that?
No.
No.
And what is the other one? 24, he has one there, 24 hours and the miracle 24 hours or something? I'm trying to think, was it?
Here's why.
There it is.
Oh.
24 hours to change the world.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is that about what? Making sense
That's about
of God's will.
Yeah. So those are questions. What are the questions? What are the chapters?
Chapter 1, why do the innocent suffer? It's like, okay, why do the innocent suffer? Why do my prayers go unanswered? Why can't I see God's will for my life? And why God's love prevails?
Four
like,
sessions.
Why do bad things happen to good people?
So there are 4 chapters.
4 chapters. Yes.
Well, that would work out fine.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we got one of them.
Why not? We may have more around. So. All right.
Oh, yeah, the Adam Hamilton section.
Yes,
Yeah.
So these are up here is all the Bible studies that we've done recently, or books that pastor has brought to church that I'm trying to organize. Here, take this home and
All right. So Sue, we'll see you when you get back. We're going to be having a meeting of the pastoral care team very soon. So.
Okay, well, we got outreach on Thursday and we got Bible study. So I'll be there.
We have outreach
Yeah.
at 6:30 on Thursday and executive board at 8 in-house.
You know what?
Executive board is at 8.
Right. Okay. And then at the outreach, we can make a date for the next parish health because it's the same group of people.
Yeah, we got it all under control.
Absolutely. I got it for a minute.
All right.
See you Thursday at 1.
All right. So long, everybody.
Bye-bye.